Hello, everybody. Good morning. This is your host, Jordan Tremaine, and welcome to the Perspective Podcast, where we explore new thoughts, connect ideas, and offer perspectives that may change the way you think about a thing or two. And today, we're going to talk about labels. All right, what's up, everybody? Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, good whatever time of day, or maybe you're in space, so days don't really apply to you. But hello, greetings to you. Hope you're doing well. I hope I release these on Friday, so happy Friday if it's Friday to you, or happy whatever day it is if you're not listening on a Friday. But hope you're ready for some idea-ing, because today's episode is about something called labels, and I think this is something that's very simple. I think a lot of the episodes that I put out are about very simple concepts, but often I think we can put ourselves in positions where, because something is simple, we tend to, in our minds, make it even more simple. Like, oh, I understand it, and I don't need to dig any further into it. It doesn't really connect with other things. I got it. I know what's up. But I think there can be a lot of value in taking some time to really look at the stuff we think we know, or challenge the things that we're very comfortable with, or to kind of examine the words that we use or the culture that we live in to see, is this really the best thing for me? Or is there something that I can do that's better? Is there a small change that I can make, or look at things in a different way that can allow me to be a lot less frustrated, or to deal with people better, or to have a better life? And I think that this concept today of labels is something that, if you haven't thought about already, may have the capacity to get you to think about some things in a different light, and it might affect your behavior and how you treat people, or how you treat yourself, or what you say, or what you think about yourself. So it can go a lot of directions, and I'm going to stop being too descriptive about something that I'm not describing, and get into the actual meat and potatoes of today and talk about what we're supposed to be talking about. So, yeah. When I say labels, in my mind, I think that if you go back and look at the Box of Language podcast, it talks about how there's ideas and concepts and things that exist out in the real world, or in reality, and we try to explain them. We try to use our English, or our French, or our sign language, or our syntax, or whatever kind of language we have. We try to use those things to explain whatever we observe, or whatever we hear, whatever we taste, whatever we touch. And we're limited by our language. And so when you try to explain something, by default, you're going to not be able to really get across the whole point of what you're trying to explain, because you're limited by your language. And I think there's a lot of cases where, for expediency, because we don't want to spend forever talking about something, or to make it manageable, like we can bite off enough and chew it, and it's not biting off more than we can chew. I think there's a tendency to simplify things, or to treat things as simple, so that we can deal with them better. And this is the concept of labeling, where there are a lot of things that are very complex, that have a lot of different sides, and to truly understand something usually takes a lot of time and energy and effort. And we don't always have that time, energy, or effort, or we don't want to give it up. So there's this thing we can do by just simplifying something and labeling it as something that helps us to not have to deal with all the complexity. And this is good sometimes, because you don't need to know everything about everything. Like, everybody doesn't need to know everything about a car to drive a car. So we just label it as car and we move on. We don't need to know about the engine, or the transmission, or the drivetrain. Somebody may need to know about that, but most people don't need to know that. And so I'm not saying labeling is bad. I'm bringing up labeling as a concept so that we can discuss it and see how it as a concept can be helpful or harmful to us. I think everything is a tool. Nothing is good or bad. Guns are not good or bad. Rocks are not good or bad. You can use rocks to build a wall. You can use rocks to build a house, or you can use rocks to kill somebody, or you can just leave the rock alone. But in any case, the rock is still a rock. It's not a good or bad thing. It's just a tool. And the same with guns. You can use guns to hunt so that you can eat and feed your family, and you can also use guns to do horrible, awful stuff to people who don't deserve it. And I think labels like guns and like rocks are tools. And when we look at our tools and we see what they're capable of, and we understand the power of the tools that we hold, I think that it can help us consciously make more responsible decisions about what to do with our tools. So in terms of labels, I think that today's episode is going to be focused on labeling people, because I think labeling a table, or a house. I mean, there's a bunch of different types of houses, and just saying, oh, my house, doesn't give you the full picture of the house. But I mean, for most intents and purposes, it's good enough. For the table, for intents and purposes, good enough. But for people, I think often there is a lot of effort put into creating labels for people in order to simplify their existence. And I think that labels are concepts that people use to simplify something that they're having trouble accepting. So it makes it more palatable or easier to deal with. And so there's a lot of times where, and I'm not trying to trigger anybody, but I mean, I guess like trigger warning or whatever, when I say some of this stuff, but everybody, every human is a person. There's nothing, literally nothing, that any human can do that can strip them of the title of human. They remain human at all points. I think sometimes we try to obscure the idea that someone is a human, or ignore the idea that someone's a human, because it helps us treat them the way we want to treat them. So if I start calling you slave, or murderer, or rapist, or something, then I can take away this concept that you're a person and label you as the other thing, like a slave or whatever, and then treat you like a slave, rather than recognizing that even if you are a slave, because there were times in antiquity, there's probably still times around the world today where slaves really do exist and people are treated as slaves. And I'm not saying that's good or bad, but just because someone's a slave, just because someone's a murderer, just because someone's a rapist, doesn't mean they're not a person, doesn't mean they're not a human. Just because somebody's a dictator doesn't mean they're not a human. They are always a human. And I realize that makes it much more difficult to deal with these people, because you have to look at them like, even though somebody may do these horrible things, they're still a person. They still have feelings. They still have a mother. They might have kids. They might still do good stuff. And that gets much harder to deal with, because I can't judge you and just throw you in a box and say like, oh, you're bad. Because I think a lot of times we like to look at stuff as good and bad. It makes things much easier to deal with. But I think we lose out on a lot of the actual reality of things and the actual life of things by just having these binary categories where it's 1 or 0, where it's good or bad, where it's black or white. Because most of the time it's shades of gray. I would say it's very rare that you would run into anything pure. And by pure, I mean like all good, or all bad, or all black, or all white. Most of the time things are colorful, or there's shades of gray involved. And I want to bring this up in terms of labeling, because I think often humans can be prone to try and craft or create narratives or stories that are ultimately labels to put on a group of people or an individual person, because once we identify them as this label, it allows us to treat them a certain way. And if you look historically at a lot of the mistreatment of certain peoples, or a lot of the war that one group of people makes on another group of people, there's a significant amount of time where before the war happens, before the mistreatment, before the genocide, people start talking, and people start listening, and people start saying stuff about the group that they want to do things to. And they start painting this picture and creating this narrative and applying this label and basically saying like, that group of people, they're not human. they're murderers. That group of people, they're not human. They're gypsies. They're thieves. They're Jews. They're niggers. And they're not real people, so we don't have to treat them like people. This concept is very effective. I think because of humans, I think we have this kind of like pre-wiring to want to understand things, to want to feel like we know what's going on, and to want things just straight and simple. I think everybody just wants to know what's up, and I just want you to talk straight. Just tell me what's up. And that's not a bad thing. But I think sometimes it can lead us to a place that can be harmful to a lot of people, because we're treating them like they're only one-dimensional. And I think we're all at fault for this. We all, especially when somebody does something we don't like, I think we're all at fault for, even in just our heads, maybe not even out loud, crafting this narrative and saying mean things about this person and creating this label for like your boss that you don't like, and you say, oh, this boss is an evil person, they do this, I hate them, this and that and that, and it totally ignores the fact that they have a family and they do community service, and a lot of the decisions they make involve pieces of information you don't have. So maybe their decisions that they make, you don't like them because you have 5 of the 10 facts, but they have all 10 of the facts. So they're making decisions that make sense once you have all the facts. And I'm not trying to like say you should always be like, oh, my terrible boss is great. Maybe he's a real person. I should like be nice to him. I think you should be nice to people, but I think it's worth it to do your due diligence before judging and labeling people, to try and understand their situation, to try and empathize with them, to try and see where they're coming from. I know it's not always possible to empathize with people. I don't know. I have to do an episode on empathy, but empathy has a lot to do with shared experience. And if you have no similar experience to what they're experiencing, then it's very hard for you to empathize. And so you can't always do that. And even if you do have similar experience, empathy is like a simulation you're running. It's something you're making up in your head. So you could be just wrong. You could be off. And you can't always do that. But I think it's worth trying to understand the other people's side, trying to see the multifacets of somebody. I think we're very quick to judge other people. But very interestingly, we're very quick to humanize ourselves. When we do something, oh, I'm not a bad person. I didn't mean to do that. I was just mad. That's everybody. That's not just you. But when somebody else does something, you're like, that person is terrible. No, maybe they were just mad and they had a bad day. Or maybe their mom has cancer and they're really stressed out and they lashed out at you because they don't know how to manage their emotions when they get out of control, or when things get too stressful. And I'm not saying we should just let everybody do anything. I'm saying we should look at the real picture and try and understand the person, and try and see if we can deal with the real person and not just write them off and label them as hysterical or crazy or a rapist or something like that. And I'm not saying that we need to ignore, like if somebody's a rapist, I'm not saying we should ignore the fact that they raped somebody. That's something we need to take into account. But that's one part of them, and it's not all of them. Look at the other things. And I'm not saying they shouldn't go to jail. Like, you should be accountable for what you do. But I don't think that for one thing, like you live your whole life, maybe you're like 40 years old and you do one thing when you're 40 that's bad and you go to jail for it. Like, you had 40 years of other stuff you were doing and relationships you were building and experiences you had. And like, people are very complex. And I think it's healthy to look at the complexity, to wrestle with the idea that somebody can do good things and do bad things, and that you yourself can do good things and do bad things. And you're not a good or bad person just because you did a good thing or a bad thing. You're a person that does things, and sometimes some people think the thing is good, and sometimes people think the thing is bad. But you are not the thing you did. That's just something you did. And other people are not the things they do. That's just stuff they do. People are very complex. And when you label someone, it allows you to dissociate them from their humanity. It allows you to just think of them only as that label and simplify them into one aspect of their being or one action in their life. And this makes them much easier to judge or condemn or be quote unquote better than, and oh, he did this, so he's unclean, or he's not pure anymore, and I can't be friends with him because he's blah blah blah, or he's friends with her, so he must by association be shady or something like that. I don't think that's fair. And I'm not saying there's no such thing as a shady person or a bad person or this or that. I think that we can be very quick to judge without getting facts, without understanding the full picture, without understanding all the motivations that went into the action that we're looking at or the person that we're judging. And it's frustrating and difficult, and it can take a lot of time to try and see where the other person is coming from. But isn't that what we would want other people to do for us? When we get caught up in a situation and they don't have all the facts and they're judging us prematurely, isn't all we want is for them to see what really is, see us as a real person? And if that's how we want to be treated, we don't want to be labeled ourselves. We don't want to be turned into second-class citizens because I'm no longer a person. I'm no longer a mother. I'm no longer, well, I'm not a mother, I'd be a father, but I'm no longer a brother or a son or an employee or a member of the community. I'm only this thing that I did. I'm only this relationship that went bad. I'm only this color of my skin. Nobody wants to be treated like that. And if you don't want to be treated like that, does that make sense to treat other people like that? Or to label other people like that? I don't know. I don't think that's consistent. So that doesn't make any sense to me. But what I'm trying to get at is, I think humans have a tendency to do this. I think this is very easy to fall into. And so if this is something that you want to not do, I think you have to actively not do it. You have to be on the lookout and watch yourself for labeling. And when you see it happen in places when other people are doing it, you need to call it out. I think when you let other people do stuff in front of you, like, I don't agree with labeling, but when Bob tries to label somebody, I don't say anything. Like, you're practicing making labeling okay by not calling it out. And that makes you weaker, and that makes you more likely to label. And I'm not saying you gotta be this, like, jump on top of the table, be like, don't label people, this and that, but, like, ask some questions. Like, open up the conversation and be like, oh, well, why do you think that? Oh, I thought that he was also a brother and also this and that. And, like, you know, he had a couple of bad days, and then his wife got in a car accident and died, and he just snapped. And it could happen to any of us. But not necessarily like to condemn people, but maybe try and advocate. Not necessarily to say that person's a good person or they don't deserve the punishment they got for doing the crime, but that they're a person. And they always maintain their humanness. There's nothing that you can do to strip somebody's humanness. There's nothing that once you're born, there's nothing your mom can do to strip the title of mom from her. She's a mom forever because she had you. Even if you die seconds later, she's still a mom. And to remember that people are multifaceted, that people have different sides, that people are more than one-dimensional. I think that's very difficult, but it's very worth it. This has something to do with the Logic Fusing podcast that I did a little while ago, where like, people are a lot of different things, and there's this tendency or this desire for us to take all of the things that somebody is and, like, fuse them together and turn them into one thing. You are this, and that's all that you are. And if you go back and listen to the Logic Fusing podcast, which has a history in the logic aliasing and all that kind of stuff, it kind of explains why that is a little more dangerous than I think a lot of people consider. But yeah, just give people a chance. Also, I think that a very big danger of this labeling idea, because if you get into the habit of labeling or accepting labels or not calling other people out on labels when they put them on other people, then something that's what I would call very problematic is mislabeling. Because if you're in the habit of labeling, of shrinking someone down into just one thing, it's very possible that you can mislabel somebody. You're not perfect. You're not the smartest man on the planet, the smartest woman on the planet, or the smartest person on the planet. And so you can make a mistake. And you can call someone something that doesn't apply to them. Even if the media says something or the situation is confusing, you don't have all the facts, and maybe, like if you mislabel somebody and they suffer all this horrible stuff and then it comes out that they weren't really that, then you're probably going to be like, oh, well, I didn't know this and that. And then you want everybody to treat you like a human that can make mistakes, but you didn't treat that other person. You mislabeled that other person like someone that just this one thing. And then that's not good for anybody. So I think sometimes this is unconscious, but I think that mislabeling can happen as like an honest mistake, but more likely I feel that mislabeling is often a tactic that is used to justify righteous behavior. So you try to put a label on somebody, like the Nazis did with the Jews. I feel like they try to put this label of it's your fault that everything's bad, you're bad people kind of thing on the Jews, when where did that come from in reality? But by adding that label to them and treating them like that, by shrinking them down into one dimension, it made it much easier to treat them very badly. But the whole label was false. Like, there was no justification. Like, sometimes somebody like rapes somebody or somebody murders somebody, something like that, and they really did that, and then on top of the fact they really did that, then we shrink them down to just being a murderer, and we treat them like they're only a murderer and not a father and not a member of the community and all this stuff. And that's bad. But then it's even worse when, like, the person didn't even do anything, and then we just put this label on them like they're terrible, and then we treat them like this terrible label, and we take away all the other aspects of their humanity and just treat them like this terrible thing, but they never even did anything. That's like the worst thing. But I think you like practice, you get better at labeling people, and it makes you more likely to mislabel people. Because I think a lot of times humans have feelings, and that's fine. But when we get really angry or we have very strong emotions, we can tend to do stuff that's not nice. And if we've already practiced doing not nice stuff on a small scale, it makes it easier to do not nice stuff on a big scale. So I'd say, like, try not to label at all, because then when you get all mad, then you're likely to like really go out there and like label badly for your own benefit or what you think is your own benefit and stuff like that. So please be nice to people. People go through a lot. You have no idea what people go through. You go through a lot. Like, think about your life and all the stuff you've been through and all the stuff you've suffered that nobody will ever know. And then think that everybody has some version of that. Everybody goes through stuff, and it's difficult for them. Even if it would have been easy for you, it's difficult for them. And to understand that people don't always act perfectly. People don't have all the information. People didn't always have good training. Some people are abused. They're dealing with PTSD or trauma, or somebody like brainwashed them in some way. They had a childhood that convinced them of something or other. And maybe you didn't have that, and you don't have to deal with that in your head, but they do. And sometimes it's a miracle that they don't go out and murder people every day because of all the stuff that's happened to them and all the stuff, the demons they're dealing with in their head. So, I'd caution you not to put yourself at risk and not to go out there and become vulnerable and then get attacked by people. But as much as you can, try and see other people's side of the story. Try to see the humanity in every human, because it exists. It's never, you cannot wipe away the humanity of a person. So that's kind of what I think. I think that this idea of labeling is important, and as much as you want people to treat you like a human, treat other people like a human. It's one of the things that helps us live in a good society. It's one of the things that helps us have neighbors, and it's one of the things that help us not kill each other and launch nukes all the time. The understanding we're human, and we can talk about things, we can discuss things, we can disagree, and still be neighbors. It's very important. It's not any fun sometimes. It's very difficult. I'm not saying this is easy. I'm not saying this is something that I love doing, but it's something that's worth doing. So, some food for thought. I hope this is catching you well, or getting you to think a little bit, or consider some things. But whatever kind of day that you're having, or whatever kind of day that you had if the day is over. I hope it was real. I hope you interacted with some actual humans. I hope humans interacted with you and you guys treated each other like humans and you were able to see the humanity inside of each other. And whatever happens in the future, I hope that this concept helped you and that it turns into a good conversation somewhere down the road. This has been Jordan Tremaine with the Perspective Podcast episode on labels, and I hope you have a good week.